Hey everybody, welcome to episode 4 of The Liberal Arts Can Save the World. This is a show where we talk to PLU faculty and staff about the things they're passionate about and how those things matter in the world. My name is Kevin O'Brien. I'm the Dean of Humanities. I use he, him pronouns, and today I'm joined by two awesome colleagues. Below me is the Dean of Inclusive Excellence, Dr. Jen Smith.
I don't know how I feel about
also
that. I think there's a hierarchy
just
problem there.
Physically, okay, all right, here we go. Also on the screen with me, with no hierarchy, is Dr. Jen Smith, Associate Professor of, you guessed it, Gender, Sexuality, and Race Studies. Jen's also the co-host of the Diversity Deep Dive, which I'm sure you're all watching every Thursday. Hi, Jen.
Hello, Kevin. Thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to correct you when you said I was below you.
I bet it's not the only time you'll correct me today. That's
probably
a little bet I'm making. Yeah. And with us on equal playing field completely is Dr. Neal Yakelis, Professor of Chemistry, and also the Vice Chair of the PLU faculty. Thanks for being with us, Neal.
Hello, Kevin. Hi, Jen. Feel free to do some sort of Zoom randomization so that you can show up in different spots on the screen.
To move us around. Okay, yeah. If I knew how, I would.
Well, it's funny because Neal is actually below me on my screen, so yeah.
There's a lesson there about how everything is relative. We are going to shake up our format today, and rather than focus on one faculty's expertise, we're going to meet as 3 people with liberal arts backgrounds who teach liberal arts, and we're going to talk about stuff. To get the two of you to introduce yourselves in a liberal artsy way, I wanted to note that you're both graduates of fine liberal arts colleges, and ask, like, what about PLU, another fine liberal arts university, reminds you of or feels like your college, your alma mater? Neal, why don't you go first?
Okay, Kevin. Oh, and I use he, him pronouns too. Just FYI. I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about what were some of I went to Allegheny College, which was a small undergraduate only institution at the time, I think.
How many people were there?
I think there were about, I want to say when I was there, maybe 1,700, 1,800. Ooh. It might be slightly more now. So it was pretty small. And I'm just remembering like what some of my favorite classes were. Besides, I love chemistry, and I love the community of chemistry, like where you knew all the professors and the majors, and undergraduate research was a big part of the emphasis there. So I got to do undergraduate research with 2 different professors while I was studying there. And that was definitely, experience that led me on my path into academia as a professor here. But I think that some of the classes I took focused on, like, as thinking of the liberal arts perspective, some of the required classes I took were really, they were some of my favorite ones. They were things that when I had a choice of, like, I have to take some sort of social science class, like it was like going to a restaurant where you love everything on the menu and you just want to sample everything. I remember, but I remember even back then, this was back in like 1993, we had, I was in a humanities class where we were talking, where one of our main themes of the semester was trans identity, and we had watched The Crying Game and wrote a number of things to reflect and discuss on The Crying Game way back then. But also, using art and activism in that class, and I've had poverty and race was one. I think it's amazing though, thinking back, that these are things that are still timely that we're talking about in our classes now.
Yeah,
absolutely.
As we continue to tackle these issues and injustices in the country and the world. So I think those were kind of some of the memories I had, and things that then definitely connected me back to, these are still things that are very of importance in the PLU community.
Cool.
And now when you're thinking about like what faculty colleague to sit next to, you're like, this is like a restaurant where I love all the dishes on the menu, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I don't want to think about my faculty colleagues.
What about you, Jen?
I went to Franklin College in Indiana, and it was like maybe, I think we were 1,400 at the time. I think they're a little smaller now. And again, it was a liberal arts school. I just loved it. I mean, I didn't love everything about it at the time, but it was so transformative in my life, and I'm so fond of it. And we had a J term like PLU. And so I remember a couple of things I did in that J term. One is we had a residency requirements for the first year, so we had to take a class. And I took a class on vampires and popular culture, which had a lot of potential. And we watched some fun things. So we watched like The Lost Boys and the first Interview with a Vampire, or the first book in that series or whatever. The professor was okay, but I just remember thinking, oh, you can study this in school. And that certainly shaped kind of some of the things I studied later on, particularly in graduate school, and certainly the things I teach. Just because I remember, even though the teacher wasn't sort of the best person I'd ever had in the classroom, there was something about the ability to do something that didn't seem very scholarly in a scholarly context that I loved, because it, I think, messed with borders and boundaries a lot, which ended up sort of being the focus of my work as a scholar when I did my PhD. And then another J term, I went to Italy, which is the first time I went abroad. And it was that faculty, it was a faculty pair, a husband and wife team, and it was their first time taking students out of the country, and my first time going out of the country, and it was amazing in all the ways that you think studying abroad is amazing, but it's also really challenging, and it was awesome. But I was abroad with students this January in Tobago, which wasn't the first time, but it was the first time that this faculty member had seen me on Facebook, and she was like, "Are you abroad with students?" And I was like, "I am." And she was like, "Oh my gosh."
Full circle. Yeah.
She's like, "I feel like they're my grandkids." And so it was just really sweet to kind of talk with her about like what it's like to be abroad with students in the same way that she was abroad with us. And yeah, I mean, I had faculty who could like teach the crap out of classes and who cared and were human. And if there was something I wanted to study, like they were willing to do it. So we did a independent study on, I think, queer poetry with me and a friend and one other faculty member. And then this is related to you, Neal, so like just kind of the menu of classes. One class I signed up for was the history of intellectual thought. And there were only 2 of us in the class.
Oh, wow.
And you can't hide. And it was amazing. And it was just, I loved their faculty so much, and they were just really amazing. So yeah, I love the liberal arts, and it literally changed my life. So yeah. What about you, Kevin?
Awesome. Well, I also went to a small school in the great state of Indiana, like you, Jen.
Yeah.
Earlham College is, I think, the smallest of the 3 of us, our alma maters. I think there were 1,000 students when I was there.
Wow.
And the thing, Neal actually said the thing that I remember, which is just that that you could get to know the faculty at a really direct level, but especially like when you picked a major, you then became, not only you knew all the faculty, but they all knew you. Mm-hmm. And so I was a religion major, and I like could not only go to the people I was taking a class with, but the other folks in the religion department and ask them a question. I remember I was really into a feminist theologian named Sally McFaig, and I couldn't figure out how to pronounce her name. And I just went into the religion office and asked the first professor I saw. He was like, "Oh yeah, Sally, I know her." And we had this conversation about Sally McFaig. And that level of community and access, I think, was what sticks out most to me about my undergraduate experience, and what I most want to make sure that PLU students feel to continue that liberal arts tradition. Yeah. And also, go Hoosiers.
Sure. Some days yes, some days no. We're complicated people. We are the home of my parents.
Aren't we all?
Oh, sorry,
yeah.
Yeah.
That's the second time she's corrected me, just for those keeping score at home.
Sorry.
Our goal for today is just to talk about a common topic and sort of how we're looking at the world from our perspectives, but also from the many perspectives that we have as liberal artists. And what we decided to think about a little is something that most of us haven't thought about at all until the last few months, which is personal protective equipment, or masks, especially for most of us in a direct experience, And I want to start by saying the liberal arts is all about critical thinking. I don't think all questions require extensive critical thinking. The question of whether I should wear a mask when I go outside and can't socially distance is not complicated. I should. And almost certainly you watching, you should too. And wear a mask when you come to campus and wear a mask when you go to the store. But
I'm going to complicate it, but I'll wait. So yeah.
Third correction. No, go. Come on.
No, no. It's so. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No. Go ahead, please.
Okay. I do that too. No, it's so in preparation for thinking about this. So I teach in the Gender, Sexuality, and Race Studies program at the university, and so one of the things I was thinking about PPE, and especially masks, is, again, I mean, in an ideal world, something like a mask would be the sort of apolitical thing that you just do to be safe. But for individuals of color, especially Black men, it's not. And so when they're in a body that is already defined as criminalized, there's no way for them to wear a mask and not feel vulnerable. And so, of course, they should be able to wear a mask without fear, but because of who they are within a system of patriarchy and racism, they're making, in some ways, they're making a choice. I was reading up, and there was a scholar at UCLA's School of Public Health was saying people are asking, which death do I choose? And not some people, Black men are choosing which death do I choose because of the fear of being either the victims of state violence that are sanctioned or unsanctioned state violence, where individuals sort of quote unquote take the law in their own hands, like the individuals who murdered Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. And so I think there is I think I will complicate that question about.
And just to make sure it's super clear and I understand it, it's that for people who are way too often consider a threat just for being outside, just for being in a neighborhood, just for being in a store, a mask can make others interpret them as more threatening. And so it in fact is dangerous for some people, for Black men, for instance, to wear a mask. Is that, am I getting that point?
No, that's, totally.
And so already, let's complicate it. And let's say if it's safe to, everybody should wear a mask when they go out in public, because it's not safe to not wear a mask. But then if it's not safe, then we have all these things to balance. And that makes, that's just one sign of how complicated the world is.
Yeah, I was reading a tweet by a Black man in Pennsylvania, Aaron Thomas, and he was saying, he's like, I want to stay alive and I want to stay alive. And it is a tragedy in a world where particular bodies are defined as criminal and therefore dangerous from the get-go, that wearing a PPE, in this instance a mask, would render them even more vulnerable in the context of a pandemic occurring in a state founded in white supremacy. And state, I mean like the United States, the state of the nation.
I accept the correction 100%.
Well, it wasn't a correction, it's just a tweet. Just a complication.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Neal, I guess one thing that distinguishes you as a lab scientist is you've actually regularly worn protective equipment on a daily basis.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on that with our lab manager recently, thinking about personal protective equipment. And we, in chemistry, we have chemical hazard PPE, or personal protective equipment. Most often that's the thing you might think of, things like lab goggles or lab coat, or disposable gloves or rubber gloves that are reusable, or things like that. And that is, I think the PPE that we use is always, it's usually, we're using it as a way to prevent some sort of splash or things happening unexpectedly in lab. And I think, but one of the differences is that those are often the hazards that you can see. And what we're dealing with is, when we're talking about the transmission of a virus, that's something that is invisible. And I think that's one of the big challenges of how people approach this, is that it's not something that it's invisible. unless it's, you know, ravaging someone and you know them
Mhm.
and love them and you're watching them
Absolutely, right.
suffer, then it's very visible. So that was one reflection I had about what it, because of the invisibility of viruses, does that, and bacteria for that matter too, I think,
Mhm.
how does that impact our approach toward PPE?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, one thing that makes me realize is in my experience of wearing PPE and also carefully watching who else around me is wearing or not wearing a mask or PPE or goggles or a face shield, I quickly begin to, as a shorthand, think of the person as the threat rather than the virus that they may or may not be carrying and breathing. And so I think because the virus is invisible, I've started to think of like, oh, that exposed face is threatening to me, which of course it's not, right? That person may have the virus inside them and that's a threat to me. But it is, I think the invisibility has led me to sort of be scared of other people in a way I didn't used to. And of course, we can also examine, Jen will help me examine, we've all been conditioned to be scared of certain other people, but I think much more so just going outside my house is a sense of people might be dangerous. And I appreciate the reminder, no, the virus is dangerous, right? And the people may carry it and may make choices that make it more or less likely that it gets spread. But the invisibility of the virus makes it easy to, I guess, project a lot onto other human beings, which I hadn't thought about.
Now, what's so interesting about that is I'm working on speaking of student faculty research, I've got a grant to work on a research project with a student right now where we're talking about this idea of sort of doing a trans analysis of what's happening. And one of the things that we're examining is that, you know, what this moment is teaching us is the kind of, I guess, the inherent connection between all human beings. We've always been breathing each other's air and sucking up each other's like spittle and whatever. And so if anything, I know it's not really sexy. It's a reminder of the permeability of our bodies, and our bodies have always been this vulnerable. And so it's interesting to think about sort of the fear of other bodies, and kind of maybe what that reflects about the wish for a impermeable shield or something, or like that, the sort of the fiction of that we are islands unto ourselves. And this virus is teaching us that, oh, no, not in fact, you've never been an island unto yourself. And that's always been the case, but it's teaching us that lesson in a way that is really potent, and scarily so. But what can we learn about the fact that, you know, we're always sucking up each other's air and our, you know, smells and whatever, and that we are reliant on each other for our literally our well-being right now. And I think that also relates to issues of race and class and the environment that PPE also brings up. And so there's a real opportunity to think about the interconnectedness of our bodies, and our very selves, in this moment there. Yeah.
And that was one thing that it does, I think, that this idea, you know, being afraid of others' bodies and being exposed to other people's air and things like that. There are people who, you know, have compared the sort of zeitgeist right now to what happened early in the HIV crisis in the 1980s, and how, you know, people who were infected with HIV were, you know, stay away, they're dirty, they're going to kill you. And, you know, caused that. It took a long time before people actually, you know, got to the point where they were studying how really it was transmitted. And I think that's one of the things that holds us back right now, is because it's so new, that it seems like, you know, studies come out regularly that show like, well, how transmissible is it really? You know, that recent one about, you know, among children and because we had no scientific data to support one way or another. We were just taking our best guess. And I think that's something that it brings up this idea of the process of science, scientific authority, who, you know, who's calling the shots, and this you know, skepticism of authority. that's another thing that has been kind of woven into all of this, that that has to, and I think it also talks to the politicization, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
But another thing I thought of too, another angle, was that before this hit, I would argue that we were becoming more and more comfortable with the idea that we are a microbial community and we have all these invisible things in us and on us, and we are sharing these things, and it's good to be exposed to them because it helps build our immune system and gives I think that it helps with our body's functioning. And I think the idea of probiotics and people chugging bacteria intentionally.
Oh, if you say SCOBY or kombucha, Kevin.
Oh yeah, I know. There you go. I think that we had reached a point where people were, I think people were becoming much more comfortable with that reality. I think now this is now sending the pendulum in the other direction, where I do not want to be exposed to any microbes. Everything has to be completely sterile. Everything is sanitized, everything. And I wonder, how society is going to make sense of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that connects both those things you said, I thought it was really interesting what you're talking about, sort of the authority of science and the questioning of that authority, but also then this comfort with the fact that so much of what's in my body is not technically me. And then there's really no clear boundary between what's me and not me. I think one thing that we all fall victim to a lot is just wanting absolute certainty. And so I certainly have felt like, well, the CDC told me not to wear a mask and then they told me to, so forget it all, right? And no, they changed their mind because they kept studying and they kept thinking about the conditions. And the same with sort of my microbiome. It was easy to think about it when it could cure me of all disease and make me sit up straighter and have a better complexion. But once my microbiome could kill me, I just want to be no, get all those germs out of there. I just want to be me and only me. And there is this, and I guess this connects in lots of ways to how we respond to pandemic, but there's this desire for purity. And I think what's really interesting about that is to think about, to wear a mask is in fact to accept, I'm not sure I'm pure, I'm not sure I'm safe, and I don't want to endanger other people. And I'm not sure this is 100% preventative mechanism, but I want to be a little better and a little less threatening to those who might be around me, and a little less threatened. But it depends upon a nuance. It depends upon a complexity, maybe.
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
No, it's funny. I think I've been thinking about some of the folks who are resistant to wearing masks, and there is a whole lot to be said about toxic masculinity right now these days. And I think it is part of accepting the vulnerability of our bodies. Again, masculinity is not tied to bodies with penises necessarily. There's plenty of that to kind of go around to bodies that have all kinds of genitalia. But but then again, you intersect that with race for Black men, and it complicates the question, which I think is what I love so much about liberal arts, is that I often tell my students what I want them to sort of leave the university with is just way more questions than answers, and a really firm grasp of how ignorant they are, and that we all are. Because it's that complicating question is so exciting to think about. When Kevin, you started by, there are certain things that don't, we also wear masks. Well, sure. And then complicating that is just so exciting. It's not just a thought experiment, but has real life and death circumstance, or life and death consequences attached to it. So
I just want to pull out one other complexity, which Neal mentioned when we were talking about this before the recording, which is just the other thing that I think a lot about with all this PPE is the disposability. And the fact that in order to keep ourselves clean, most of us are throwing away a whole lot more than we used to, and using single-use things a whole lot more than we used to, which again, for most of us is probably the best thing we can do for our own health and the health of our community, but is toxic in a literal sense, in the sense that landfills are filling up and we are consuming too many resources. And I think, again, we have to sit with that question, and we have to say, yeah, right now, absolutely, we should use disposable masks when we need to, but what would it look like to work toward a system where these weren't disposable and we could genuinely and safely and efficiently clean them? And if we're not asking the question, then we're not trying to be better. And if I'm saying, yes, everybody wear a mask, and you're not asking me the question about race, then I'm not trying to say, well, how messed up is it that I live in a world where some people aren't safe going out with personal protective equipment? Yeah. So I think the questions just challenge us to be better, to do more, and to keep working at it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The theme for our YouTube channel this week is asking hard questions, or safely engaging disagreement. And so I guess I'm curious what you would say are the, we've talked a lot about hard questions, but what are the disagreements that are worth engaging on this subject, on the sort of the subject of the fear we have about this virus, or maybe masks specifically? I will be honest and say, when I see people out in the world who like have their mask below their nose or around their neck or something, I think disagreements with them, but I rarely speak them. Or no, I never have. And I guess I'm curious, like, should I? And like, what could I possibly say to be heard in a situation like that? Or are those not the disagreements I should be engaging in right now?
No, that's a good question.
It's tough. I think, right, as we understand it right now with the types of masks that we're wearing, just the cloth or surgical type, and actually in what style of mask we wear and what that signals becomes a really important thing. Like you were talking about, I think, with this perception of, being an increased threat if you're a man of color and have, maybe, like a bandana wrapped around, as opposed, but there are masks that I think are, they're also like Pokemon masks with little smiles on them and things like. But what the type of mask that people choose to use or have access to, or is kind of it's an interesting question right now.
Yeah, UNC just did a study about race and masks, and found that Black men who were wearing like a bandana or a homemade cloth mask were seen as more threatening than Black men who were wearing a surgical mask. Mm-hmm. And so again, the problem's not the mask. I mean, sure, the question and the problem is systemic racism, but in response to that, there have been, threads of Black men talking to each other about like, well, what mask are you going to wear to make yourself, like you're saying, a Pokemon mask seem less threatening? Mm-hmm. And so there was a tweet that kind of got circulated around of a Black man wearing a mask that had flowers on it, and it said, look, wearing a mask, just trying to be safe, not trying to rob you, please don't shoot me. And again, there's a lot going on with femininity there as well, and using femininity to mitigate the idea of threat, to try to save their life within a pandemic that's happening in a racist country. So, but yeah, I mean, you think about masks as these, again, things that should have, or in terms of like their denotative meaning, have no meaning attached to them except being this thing that covers your face. The various sort of connotations attached to them and how they can signify various things related to social identity is fascinating. There's some papers there to be unpacked. Yeah. Oh, the question of
how to have these difficult conversations with. I usually, I take, if someone's not wearing a mask, I take it as a sign to stay away from them, to stay distance from them. That's usually rather than engaging them. And that's my own personal interpretation based on what I understand about mask use. And that's informed by many different things. So I think that and I think that, part of that I think is based on the fact that I have a scientist identity, and that, hearkening back to the research that is known, that has been peer reviewed, and that is broadly accepted, that wearing a mask can prevent others from being exposed if you happen to be carrying the virus, either symptomatically or asymptomatically. And so if someone is not wearing a mask, I interpret that as you don't know whether the person is carrying it or not, so stay away from them, because there might be some reason why they're not wearing it. Maybe, and there are people that claim that they can't, like they have, sort of anxiety around wearing it.
Absolutely, right.
Smothered, there doesn't seem to be, there's not physiological kind of reasons that, you know, the amount of oxygen that's getting through these
Right.
cloth masks are not a problem, but people's mental and emotional response to them, I think, is
Very real.
a very real thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the difficult conversations or questions I have around the pandemic is travel and movements and doing things. And I will say I'm a person who's traveled in the pandemic, and I'm looking to buy some plane tickets soon to travel in the fall to see family, not like a vacay to hang out. But yeah, it's one of those things that, I mean, I struggle with and with just doing it, but then also like, who do I tell? Because I'm afraid of judgment, and I just told the world, so I'm traveling, you know. But yeah, it's I think that's just a difficult conversation to have with people you're close to, or your friends, and kind of managing judgment. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd just say a theme of this is how hard it is to feel safe in communicating with others, because I mean, in a dream, you know, Mr. Rogers' neighborhood community, I'd be able to like say to somebody who wasn't wearing a mask from 6 feet away, like, oh, I see you're not wearing a mask, like, why not? And they would be comfortable saying, well, I have anxiety and so I can't, or as a Black man, I don't feel safe, and it would be a perfectly reasonable exchange. But like, we don't live in that world. Just like you can't be sure how even people you know are going to respond when you say I'm buying a plane ticket. And so it just, again, I guess, is a sign of how much of the way we live together is wrapped up in the way we feel separate and the way we feel afraid. And if we all read the work that you and your student are doing, Jen, and realize that we're all interconnected, then it's all going to be better, right?
We're all sucking up each other's stuff. Come on, people.
We're all
connected,
sucking up each other's stuff.
We are connected with each other. We're sucking up each other's air and spittle, and yeah. So
I'm going to throw this idea out, and I wanted to get your feedback as I would, as people who lean more toward the humanities side of things. But what role do you think social media has in facilitating these difficult discussions?
Oof.
I know. Yeah.
I mean, I think the first thing I'd say is just before Jen says something smart and actually answers the question is the trouble is, like, social media is one of the only places we have for the conversation. I mean, we've already, before March, we had moved into society where a lot of our interactions were online and social media. And now, because of the pandemic, so much more of the connections we have with other people are on Facebook or TikTok or Twitter or whatever. I say TikTok just to sound cool, by the way. Never been on it.
Yeah, I think just post dance videos on that, Kevin. I don't think it's a.
Okay, well then I better get on right away. But so I mean, I guess I just want to say, like, it's an urgent question, because if we can't have these conversations on social media, then we're probably not going to have them.
Yeah.
What do you think, Jen?
Social media is distanced.
I don't think it's always the tool, because I think it's always what you do with the tool that matters. And the way the tool is constructed, I'm not sure it facilitates dialogue. It's just back and forth, without kind of real substantive listening or reflection. And I have no really good answer or thoughtful response, except people should pick up a phone call and have a conversation with folks. Or to Zoom, it's not that bad. But it becomes such a one-sided, and I mean, honestly, again, it's if people go into a conversation with someone on social media with an open mind, curiosity, willingness to listen and consider and reflect, and vice versa, then, you know, sure, it could be a really exciting tool. But I'm not sure that it's often utilized that way. It becomes more of a stage for people to perform whatever it is they want to perform, rather than a deep tool for learning and engagement. So, yeah. Are you tweeting a lot, Neal, about this, or Facebooking a lot?
I would say no, because I think as of maybe last year or the year before, I don't even really engage with Facebook that much anymore.
Lace Smith, who's our marketing and communications associate vice president was saying to me today that the audience on Facebook skews older now, evidently. So I guess people are on Twitter.
Yeah, there's like a, I know there's a certain generation of alumni that engage with Facebook regularly. That's one of the reasons that I still have my account, so that in case they message me or something. But that's, yeah, it's an older generation tool now.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good question, Neal. Yeah,
that's a really good question.
Yeah,
I agree. I think talking either through phone or face to face is going to be the best way to have difficult conversations.
Yeah, or 6 feet in a backyard or park somewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No, and I guess one of the optimistic hopes I have is now that that's gotten harder to do, I hope we're sort of recognizing the value of it. And that when it is safe to be around more people a little closer for conversations, that we will appreciate it and we will do it. I hope that's true, but we'll see. I think what we've been consistent about today, as I see the time and wrap us up, is asking a lot of hard questions and giving a satisfying answer to none of them, which feels pretty authentic to the way we describe liberal arts, right? I think we've done the job.
I think that definitely encapsulates our liberal arts training, I think, is to consider these tough questions and to take time to reflect and learn what others are experiencing, learn what others are writing and communicating about this, to really, make the most informed assessment possible. And I really appreciate, Jen, I think you're talking about masks and things and how that intersects with race and masculinity, and that's something that I really want to dig into more, because I think I've said that, I think a lot of places the sort of standard issue mask is that sort of black one. I think I have one.
Oh yeah.
And
visual aid, good. Yeah.
And to me, this looks a little bit like something you'd wear to a funeral or something. Like it's pretty grim.
Yeah.
And
it's funny, on the screen it looks like your mouth has been censored.
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
And so I was wondering, what if instead of this, everyone was wearing like fluorescent pink?
Yeah.
Would that make a difference?
Maybe.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah.
But then that exactly feel like, just as Jen was saying with the flower mask, right? The idea is, these would be friendly if they read more feminine, right? And that's like, I think that's fascinating, right?
Yeah, that is fascinating.
Figure out why that is and what's behind that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe we can host a conversation with students in the fall, about masks. And they're their little fashion trend too. So yeah.
Maybe we could have
and then we could bedazzle our
mask design contest.
We could, yeah.
Absolutely. I think this is going to take off. I just want to flag, because I also want to keep thinking about the issues of race and identity and how they tie into mask and justice that Jen brought up. But Neal, I just really don't want to lose your point about the conversation about the microbiome sort of meeting the conversation about coronavirus. I think is really interesting, and sort of what conversations we have when we feel safe or immortal versus what conversations we have when we feel really under threat is really interesting. And what would it be like to bring the two together? So lots to think about.
Cool.
Good stuff. Yep.
Thank you both for taking the time, for having the conversation.
This was
thanks
great,
also
Thank you for the invite.
Of course. Thanks also to our producer Kenzie, and thanks to Leigh Smith, who Jen mentioned, who's the Pope of PLU's public presence. And thank you to all who are watching. If you should, then wear a mask, and if you shouldn't, then don't. But definitely, ask these liberal arts questions and stay curious. Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Woohoo! Bye.